Um, so Luc Ferier is the chairman of the Forgotten Heroes 1419 Foundation, and he's also the author of a book, which is shown here on the left, called The Unknown Fallen, which features unique photographs and facts about the Muslim contribution in World War I and the brothers in arms of all faiths and none. Now, the images in this book will also be part of his talk this evening. And this year, Luc has also created a very special token of remembrance shown here on the right, a lapel pin to pay homage to the Muslim contribution. Luc and his team have managed to trace and identify more than 850,000 documents, unique documents related to the enormous mutual respect between Muslims and soldiers of other faiths. He has been invited by the United Nations to present his findings at their headquarters and has been a keynote speaker at the likes of Harvard University, the House of Lords and the Scottish Parliament. For his work, he was awarded the prestigious Peace and Reconciliation Award in 2019. I'd like to now welcome Luc Ferier.
Hi.
Good morning. I should say good evening or good morning. I think in sunny California it's good morning at the moment, so I can say both.
Good morning or good evening. Thank you, Sakib, and your staff of Colourful Heritage, who is doing a tremendous job to giving me this opportunity to talk about our research to this amazing audience who's making time to attend. So first, I want to make clear that I'm not a historian, not a war historian. I'm just a researcher. And it has a specific story. And I want to use that opportunity now to thank the thousands of real historians and people working in the archives, maintaining them, collecting them, digitizing them. I want to thank the battle tour guides who are often forgotten, who are called ambassadors of remembrance, who are putting a lot of energy to tell young children the reality of the war. I want to thank the teachers who are making time available, sometimes spending their own money to clarify the impact of the First World War. So these are, in fact, my real heroes. I owe them my gratitude because they helped me in my research worldwide. The next 30 minutes or so, I don't want to go into technical details of battles and political agreements. I want to talk about the human aspects and take you on a short journey about what we discovered, if that's okay for you.
That's fine, yes, on you go.
Okay, let's start with the first slide, with how it all started. Okay, so there in the middle, you see two pictures of my great-grandfather, Leon, and some notes. He is the cause of this whole project, and just in a nutshell, at a certain moment, I arrived in the attic of my grandmother, who was forcing me to read the diaries of Leon. His name is Leon. It's French for lion. It suits him. And he served in the First World War. And after a whole process of reconstructing all his notes, I started reading it. And my first major surprise was he mentioned Mohammedans. Mohammedans is Muslims. And I was like, what do you mean, Muslims? What is he doing with Muslims in the trenches? I was very ignorant 7 years ago at that time. The second surprise is he calls them his brother in arms. And he writes how much respect he has for these soldiers from all continents. And who he writes are true believers of Islam and an amazing peaceful religion. Now for me, this was, wow, what's all this about? Because I knew from my grandmother that Leon, he was a very devout Christian. He was one of these people who went to church every morning at 6 o'clock, performed his prayers before every meal, before going to bed. And it didn't fit in my mind setting that somebody who was such a devoted Christian was writing in the trenches with so much respect about his Muslim brother in arms. So because I didn't get it, I started to look around in the libraries and speaking with people, and there was nothing. It was all about the major battles, Sykes-Picot, Treaty of Versailles, but nothing about the humans. Oh, and this is why I started with my partner Vera, the foundation, in an attempt to pay tribute to these people I knew nothing about, the Muslims who were fighting with my grandfather. I thought it would take 6 months, a year, and then I would wrap it up. And you see, after 7 years, I'm here in California giving presentations. We traveled for 7 years in 19 countries because most of the documents we traced were not in regular archives. They were in small attics, in basement, personal archives all over the world, in Algeria, in Syria, but also in Russia, in China, of course, in the United States. And we discovered that at least 4 million Muslim laborers, soldiers from all continents fought with the Allied forces for the liberation of Europe. And they all served with honor and dignity. And that is what this Zoom event is all about human stories, about friendship, compassion, solidarity, empathy, faith, and beliefs. Can I have the second map, please? The world map. Okay, so for a lot of young people, they still have not a good idea about the First World War. And often I get the question, who was involved? It makes it easy for me to tell the people that only 9 countries were not involved. So only Costa Rica, Cuba, Guatemala, Brazil, Peru, Haiti, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama were not involved. All the rest was involved. So that gives an idea about the World War. That's what we call it, a World War. So all these people traveled from all these regions to fight for the British Empire, the French Empire, and the Russian Empire. And the number of casualties was above 40 million. Now, that's huge. 40 million people died. And because of the First World War, after 4 years, the world was in a bad shape. You got the influenza, who killed another 50 to 100 million. So the death toll was enormous. And it is important to say that it is my view, and many historians, that they died for, in fact, a useless war. There was no reason to have a war. It was about borders, about minerals, about egos, but it makes it so sad. It was not like the Second World War, where we were fighting against fascism. There was a real danger. But in the First World War, it was all about personal wealth, about empires. But also, what we don't go into this now, but also the journey these people made from undivided India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, from China, from Jamaica, before they arrived at the battlefield, was already not a fun trip. A lot of these people died on the way. It's something that people forget and said, oh, they arrived in Europe to start the war. No, no, no. There's a long history of pain and suffering before they even arrived on the battlefields. But that's for another time. The next slide, please. So this is part of a monument. So it's a collation about a monument that you have in Neuchâtel about the Indian contribution. You already saw about the huge Indian contribution, but I call it the undivided India contribution because there's a big challenge we have for the moment, is that a lot of young people worldwide, not only in America, but in Canada, in Belgium, in France, and even in Morocco, they think India of today participated and not Pakistan and Bangladesh. And that's very sad because undivided India of that time included Pakistan and Bangladesh today. And certainly when you go to the personal records, it is really amazing how many, the religious diversity of these soldiers in their regiments, when they arrived, you had not only 400,000 Muslims, but you had Hinduism, you had Christianity, you had Sikhs, you had Buddhism, you had Baha'i, you had the Zoroastrianism, you had Yanis. They were all present, sometimes in the same regiment. So this is already something worth looking at, about the enormous religious diversity that was coming from undivided India. And what stunned me, when you go to their personal records from these soldiers, they very rarely refer to India. They refer to their tribe. You have conversations going on, and you're from India, and they say, no, 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 I'm not from India, I'm from Punjab, I'm from Kashmir, I'm from Baluchistan, I'm from Lahore, I'm from Jodhpur. And that reflects their identity. They were very proud on their tribe, on the region they came from. And that tells a lot of them. It makes also a lot of difference about why they engaged. They all had their own reasons. Yeah, like the people from Punjab, they were kind of a war tribe. They liked honor. This is why also so many people from the Punjab region, the Pathans, got so many medals of honor, because they were real fighters, same as the people from Baluchistan. That's why in my presentations and in my research, I focus on who were these people, and I try to highlight the region they come from. Not something from undivided India, but I try to pay tribute to their tribe, to their mentality, and to their faith. In Europe, we pay a lot of attention to Kublai Khan and Mirdas, who got the Victorian Cross, but I would like to see more people, individuals highlighted, who also sacrificed their life and for the freedom of Europe. Next slide, please. The battle was not only in Europe, it was also in the Middle East and in the Balkans. And I use that image to explain something mainly to young children. It's about diversity. And we have this idea, that concept, that you had the British Expedition Force and the French, and you had the Moroccan division. Well, that's good in Hollywood movies, but the slaughter at certain moments was so huge that officers were forced to reform their regiment with everything that was left. We can't imagine the horror. So when you lose in one day 50 to 100,000 soldiers, you need to form a new battalion, a division, a regiment. So they were getting all these people together from all faiths and none, from all countries, from all tribes. And that's a picture. It's not a Photoshop, it's not a collated. It is from troops in Thessaloniki, in Greece. You have to look at these people. You know, they are in their traditional uniforms because they are proud of the uniforms. You had people from Somalia, you had people from Indochina, from Russia, from undivided India. It's about diversity. And I use that, they won the battle. They say diversity is a weakness. I say, no, diversity is a strength, not a weakness, because these people fight together, won the battle against the Germans. And it's also that I use all these people came with their identity. And that's very important to know what we can learn from the First World War. When these people arrived, they had their culture, their languages, their faith. And we know from a lot of documents that there was such a huge mutual respect between all of them. And it's a tool to challenge the hate crime and the fake news that we can't live together, that we cannot be in the same culture, that we cannot stand together, that there's division. It's not. We can use many of these stories of the First World War that mutual respect is possible. Not only in the World War, but always, without compromising your own faith or your own tradition. It's a beautiful picture. There's so many stories behind it. And I like to use it mainly when I give presentations in schools. Next presentation. Next slide. So I want to go into some fundamental aspects challenging the idea that's being spread about Muslims. When you go on social media and you go Muslims, most of the time you get all this rubbish from Daesh and ISIS and atrocities. It's not what Islam is about. This is what I discovered. What we discovered is that Muslims were enormously concerned about prisoners of war. During the battle, you have on the right side down, you see Muslim soldiers nursing a German soldier on the battlefield. He was wounded, the battle was over. But what's really astonishing is that we know from official documents from the French and the British that they were stunned by the attitude of Muslims that they refused to hand over prisoners of war unless they promised not to put these prisoners of war in cages. They told these officers, you have to feed them. They should not beg for their substance. You cannot torture them. You have to treat them as human beings. Now, in 1914, there was no Convention of Geneva. So, in fact, you could, and it happened, you could shoot prisoners of war on the battlefield. So these British and French officers are writing down that they say, can you imagine these Muslims, mostly illiterate, they come from Undivided India, from North Africa, and they're lecturing us how to treat prisoners of war. If we don't promise them that we will not hurt them, they don't want to hand them over. So it's challenging a lot of prejudice about what we see today on social media about what Islam is. I didn't know it either. I was stunned when I started reading these first reports and the discussions that were happening between officers and Muslims because they refused to hand over these Germans. And they said, look, these Germans, they are using fire trials, they are using chemical weapons, they are insulting your prophet, dropping leaflets to make you crazy, to change your opinion. And still, when you catch Germans, you treat them as human beings and you want them to be treated well by us. It's really amazing that there's so many stories behind individuals who are all documented that change the perspective about how we should think about these Muslims. Next slide, please. That's another image was really, really astonishing. In 1917, there was famine in Europe. The people were dying, there was no food. And soldiers on the battlefield were forbidden, advised not to share their food with the local people because the soldiers needed to be strong for the battle. And the first time I saw this picture was in an exhibition in France. And it says that the child is giving food to the Muslim soldier on his horse. And why not? Until a few years later, we found reports, again from official records, from officers who are complaining that these Muslim soldiers, they don't want to obey their orders not to share their food with the local people, and that they are referring to the hadith, that they are saying, we cannot do this. We have to share our food with hungry. We will not obey. Now, in the army, that's very critical, you know, disobeying an order. So, but for these officers, it was like, he's disobeying an order, but he's referring to his fate. So I have to accept that. So when I discovered that, and I said, wait. I went back to France and I told the people, you have to change the text next to it, that the child is not giving food to the soldier, it's the soldier giving food to the child. I still haven't done it. It still says that the child is giving food to the soldier. it gives you an idea how much work we have to change narratives and say, look, this is what Muslims are all about. They share their food on the battlefield. It's one of their pillars, and they will even disobey orders to follow their faith. I think it's a beautiful image, and it's also a beautiful story behind. Next slide, please. So I want you to look at the picture on the right side. You see an entrance of a construction. It's an entrance like in an Arabic style. But it's not an entrance to a bunker. And it's not built by Muslims, it's built by French soldiers, the soldiers you see on the back now. What is the story behind that, and why do I use it? I use it to explain another amazing element of the First World War and about mutual respect. These soldiers from these other countries and these Muslims, they became brother in arms with the French, Belgium and Canadian and British. But the French soldiers, they noted that Muslims, they didn't want to perform their prayer on their knees in the trenches because the trenches were filthy. You know, you have no idea. It's not like in a movie, you know, the smell, the battle guide tools can describe it in color, how bad it was. So these Muslims were praying standing up. But these French soldiers, they saw how sometimes Muslims because they were distracted while doing their prayer. And they started to say, look, these people need a place to pray. And they started to construct small praying rooms in the trenches. It's not fabricated, it's real, a few are left. Now you have to imagine that you have French non-Muslim soldiers starting small praying rooms for their Muslim brother in arms. You don't do that out of the blue. You do that out of respect. You do that because you think these people deserve a place to perform their prayers. It's not a big issue. It's not the world is not erupting. It's just, they are my brother in arms, and I don't mind constructing them so they have a moment of peace. It's something to think about and say, how could I use this in front of young kids? Can I use that story tackling Islamophobia? No, it's just another beautiful testament about tolerance and mutual respect. The next slide, please. So, during my research and when I was visiting all these cemeteries in France and in Belgium, but mainly in France, at a certain moment, I noticed that you had Muslims buried with Christians. And on that image, you see even a Jewish grave next to a Christian and a Muslim grave. It's a beautiful image. It's interfaith avant la lettre, even before the name was invented. And I want to know why. Maybe interesting to know, you had a lot of Jews fighting also in the First World, who came from North Africa. There was a large Jewish community in Morocco, Algeria, in Tunis, and they were fighting side by side with their Muslim brothers. It was not an issue. They were both Moroccans, or they were both from the mountains, from Kabyle, Berbers, whatever. It was not like today. But I want to know, why are some of these people buried together? And when I ask official people, they say, we don't know, it happened to be like this. But that's not true. During our research, we started finding a lot of documents from chaplains, from priests and nurses. And can I have the next slide, please? And it's another enormous, strong testimony. We found a record from nurses that on some occasion, Christian soldiers asked to speak with a priest, a chaplain. So they contacted the chaplain and say, we have a soldier and he needs to ask you something. So I was thinking, oh, it's going to be confession, you know, before he died, he knows he's dying. But when we were doing research in the archives of the Vatican and other religious institutes, we started reading the diaries of these priests. And it said, when we arrived to some of these soldiers, they wanted to make a confession. They knew they were going to die, but that was not the main question. They were explaining to me, to these priests, look, I've been fighting for months, years with these Muslim brother in arms. They become my brother. Would it be possible, and is it allowed, to be buried next to them when I'm dead? Please don't take me away from them. Now, that's a very strong statement. And luckily, the priest said, of course, you can be buried with your Muslim brothers on the battlefield. It's okay, you're going to see each other in heaven. But it's such a powerful statement. The last thing some of these soldiers were thinking about was, I would like to be buried with my Muslim brothers on the battlefield. And we should talk about more. I don't know what the motivation was. I don't know what happened between these soldiers and his Muslim brother, but it must be powerful. It must be so strong that they wanted to ask the priest to bury it next to them. So when you visit the cemeteries in France or in Europe and you see that, it's not a coincidence, it's on purpose that some of these people are buried together. Can I have the next slide, please? So I want to conclude with all what I've just said in a nutshell. I know it's a lot. There's so much more to tell, but it's a tip of the iceberg. What you can learn from that mutual respect, the French building small masjid, praying rooms for Muslims, officers getting respect for Muslim soldiers because they are educating them on humanity, on tolerance. Priests explaining the brotherhood between these people of all faith and none. What is the message behind it? And what can we learn from it? Well, what I think is that is important to understand is that all these soldiers from all these countries, when they came here to fight, they brought their culture with them. They brought their religion with them. They brought their customs with them. But they integrated perfectly in the French and in the British army. They served with honor and loyalty. Unbelievable. They sacrificed their life in a war none of them making. And these non-Muslim soldiers, they were impressed by all this, that these soldiers were fighting next to them, but still they were performing their prayers 5 times a day. They were respecting the Ramadan. But also they were taking care of them. They didn't let them down. And what's the message for young people today, for every Muslim today, is that these people earned respect, and the mutual respect was created because these Muslim soldiers, they integrated, but they did not assimilate. They did not give up everything they were. They did not give up their faith, their culture, their tradition. And it's by doing that that they gain so much respect from these non-Muslims, and that they say they are here with us in the trenches. I can rely on them. I know them. I trust them. And they have their faith. That's okay. And they have their traditions. And it's not only about Muslims, it's also about the thousands of Sikhs. It's all these black people from Africa. So you have to challenge the idea that integration is the same as assimilation. It is not, absolutely not. The other question is, when you go and visit these cemeteries and you see these tens of thousands tombs of Muslims, 4 million Muslims contribute to liberate Europe, I have a question for my audience and say, all this, if you take all this in account, doesn't make it Muslims a stakeholder in Europe? If you see all the sacrifices, did this not make Muslims stakeholder in Europe? If not, what more is expected from Muslims? It's something to take away with you. And all the other slides and all the other topics, I know it's a lot in a nutshell, but it's what I do. I say, take it with you, think about it, and try to put it in the place of today. Thank you for listening. I give the word back to Sakib. Sakib, it's all yours again.